Would you believe me if I told you that an HOA tried to steal my land, the very farm my grandfather left me? They thought they could bulldoze 96 luxury homes onto my original property surveys, my legal property. Community meeting. Priceless. I never imagined I'd have to fight for land that was already mine. Samuel Walker, 100-acre farm in Pine Haven. The land had then, one Tuesday morning at 6:15 a.m., my phone rang. Mrs. Henderson, 40 years. Jordan, they're building houses on your land. Or her big now. At first, I thought she was mistaken. Maybe a construction crew had accidentally. Mrs. Henderson wasn't. They put up signs everywhere, she continued. They're planning to build almost 100 houses right on Eastern Fields. My heart pounded. I threw clothes into a suitcase and sped towards Pine Haven, breaking speed limits on Old Farmhouse. The peaceful countryside I remembered was gone. The air vibrated with the roar of bulldozers. Heavy. Mack machinery chewed into the soil where corn and soybeans. Workers, bright orange paint. Billboard stood, future home of Willow Ridge HOA, 96 luxury homes, starting at $450,000. I clenched my fists and marched straight toward a woman who didn't belong here. She wore spotless beige pants and a crisp white blouse, her perfectly styled despite clipboard in one phone in the exactly like. I interrupted as she hung up her call. What's happening here? She turned, giving me a condescending once-over. We're preparing for residential development. She, Karen Whitmore, President, Willow Ridge HOA. I ignored it. This is my land. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. There must be some misunderstanding. Willow Ridge purchased this property last year. We have all the necessary permits and approvals. I could barely breathe. Grandpa would never have sold this land. That's impossible, I snapped. He never told me about any sale. She gave me a sympathetic look, dripping with fake concern. Perhaps he didn't tell you. The sale was finalized 9 months ago. We've been planning this expansion for years. My mind raced. My grandfather had been sick in his final months, but his mind had been sharp. He would never have sold his land without telling me. Something was wrong. I need to see those documents. Karen sighed theatrically and pulled a business card from her clipboard. You're welcome to contact our legal department, she said, already dialing another number on her phone. But I assure you everything is in order. And just like that, she turned her back on me, walking away as if I didn't exist. I stood there frozen, watching as machines continued tearing up my family's land. But if Karen Whitmore thought I was just going to walk away, she had another thing coming. She didn't just mess with a grieving grandson. She walked straight into a trap set by my grandfather, one she never saw coming. By 8:00 a.m., I was parked outside the office of Mark Callahan, the only property lawyer in Pine Haven. His secretary's eyebrows shot up when I asked for an emergency appointment, but she squeezed me in before lunch. Mark was older than I expected, with thick glasses and a bow tie that made him look straight out of another era. As I spread the deeds, surveys, and county records across his desk, I watched his expression shift from polite curiosity to deep concern. He traced his finger over the old maps, his brows furrowing. This is highly unusual, he muttered. According to these original documents, your property extends nearly half a mile further east than what's recorded today. That would include not just the construction site, but also the Willow Ridge HOA clubhouse and about 20 homes built 5 years ago. I felt my pulse quicken. 20 houses? The HOA headquarters? This was bigger than I thought. Mark leaned back, removing his glasses to rub his eyes. A boundary dispute of this scale won't be simple, he warned. We need to find out when and how these changes were made. He put a call on speakerphone to the county assessor's office, navigating through an endless maze of automated options and disinterested clerks. But when we finally got an answer, it was worse than I imagined. In 1984, a minor adjustment was made, a 10-foot easement for utilities. Seemingly harmless. But in 97, something much bigger happened. The property size was reduced by nearly 80 acres. The documentation was suspiciously vague, just a single form with a barely legible signature. My stomach sank. That's impossible, I said, checking the date. My grandfather was in the hospital that month. Triple bypass surgery. There's no way he could have signed this. Mark's face darkened. If that's true, this is fraud. I clenched my fists. What can we do? Mark didn't hesitate. First, we file an emergency injunction to halt construction immediately. Then, we petition the court to recognize the original boundaries. But we'll need a professional surveyor to verify these maps. While Mark prepared the legal paperwork, I needed more ammunition. I drove to the county records office and spent hours buried in old files. That's when I found gold. Willow Ridge HOA wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a complex web of LLCs and shell companies. The same 6 names kept popping up. Karen Whitmore, her husband, Thomas Whitmore, county commissioner, James Harris, planning board director Mark Wilson, and 2 other names I didn't recognize. But the real bombshell? A loan approval from just 3 months ago, a $16 million deal to finance Willow Ridge East. And what was listed as collateral? My land. I took pictures of every document, my heart pounding. Next stop, the offices of the Pine Haven Gazette. The editor, Tanya Williams, had known my grandfather. I can't publish accusations without solid proof, she said. But I did think that HOA expansion approval seemed awfully fast. Back at the farmhouse, I found Mrs. Henderson talking to an elderly neighbor, Mr. Grayson. When I mentioned Karen Whitmore, his face darkened. That woman is the reason I sold my place, he said bitterly. She fined me every week for my tomato garden, said it violated landscaping rules. Then she went after my workshop, called it a zoning violation. The fines kept piling up until I couldn't afford to fight anymore. How many others did this happen to? I asked. At least a dozen old-timers sold out in the last 5 years, always for less than market value, and always to companies tied to those Willow Ridge people. A pattern emerged: fine vulnerable homeowners, harass them with bogus fines and regulations, force them to sell cheap, develop the land, make millions, and my grandfather had been their final target. Just then my phone rang. Mark Callahan. The judge granted the injunction, he said. Construction stops immediately until the hearing next week. But brace yourself, this is going to get ugly. I hung up, feeling my first real victory. I drove straight to the construction site, the court order in hand. Workers were already packing up for the day, but parked near the site office was a sleek black SUV. Karen Whitmore stepped out as I approached, phone glued to her ear as always. When she saw me, her expression hardened. Construction stops now, I said, handing her the court order. Legal boundaries are in dispute. She scanned the document, her perfectly composed face finally cracking. This is ridiculous, she spat. We have every approval we need. Based on fraudulent boundaries, I shot back. I have the original surveys. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her cold blue eyes, but it vanished just as quickly. This little stunt will cost you, she whispered, stepping closer. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I smirked. Actually, I do. I leaned in, lowering my voice. 6 names on dozens of shady business filings. $16 million in loans backed by stolen land. County officials fast-tracking approvals for projects they secretly invest in. I hadn't planned to reveal everything yet, but the look on her face was worth it. Her manicured hand tightened around her phone, knuckles turning white. You're making a mistake, she hissed. Perhaps you'd consider a generous offer for the remaining farmland. 7 figures, immediate payment. I laughed. Not interested. Her smile returned, confident and predatory. Everyone has a price, she purred. You don't even live here. What do you care about some old dirt? I met her gaze, unshaken. This old dirt has been in my family for 4 generations. It's not for sale. I turned to leave, feeling her eyes burning into my back. Just as I reached my car, she called out, Commissioner Harris is my husband's golf partner. Judge Evans comes to my dinner parties. You think your injunction will last? You're nobody in this town. I paused for just a second. She was right about one thing. I was an outsider now, but she'd overlooked something important. My grandfather hadn't been, and he'd left me more than just land. The night was quiet, the construction equipment sat abandoned under the court order, the field still scarred from the damage they had already done. But I knew this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, Karen Whitmore would mobilize her connections, politicians, inspectors, anyone she could manipulate. The real fight was coming. But what she didn't realize was that I had found more than just property surveys in my grandfather's hidden box. I had proof, not just of the stolen land, but who falsified the records, when, and why. Karen thought she was dealing with an absent grandchild clinging to sentimental land. She had no idea she was up against the ghost of Samuel Walker, who had spent years documenting every shady deal and corrupt approval. The trap was set. All I had to do was let them walk straight into it. My heart pounded as I pushed open the glass doors of the Willow Ridge HOA Community Center. Tonight was the night I had been preparing for weeks. Inside, nearly 100 people filled the rows of folding chairs. They sipped punch from tiny plastic cups, chatting excitedly about the new tennis courts, decorative fountains, and fancy streets that the HOA had promised them. At the front, Karen Whitmore stood tall in her bright red blazer, smiling as she gestured to colorful images of big houses on a screen. "Just imagine the swimming pool with its waterfall feature," she said smoothly. "Our homes will be worth so much more once these new neighbors move in." The crowd clapped and cheered. They had no idea that what I held in my folder would ruin their party. I took a deep breath and walked straight down the center aisle. "Excuse me." My voice cut through the noise, making heads turn. Karen's smile faltered for a split second, then returned, fake as ever. "We'll take questions after the presentation." "This can't wait." I stepped onto the small stage, facing the curious crowd. "My name is Jordan Walker. My grandfather owned this land for 60 years. Karen cut in quickly. "Yes, and we're very grateful to finally develop that eyesore." Murmurs spread through the crowd. I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. "This is the original land survey from 1910, I said, holding it up. "And this," I pulled out another, "is the updated survey from 1978. The HOA board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats as I placed copies of the documents in front of them. According to these legal records, my grandfather's land extends 80 acres farther east than what appears in the current county records. A ripple of confusion spread through the audience. "Which means," I continued, "you're building on land that legally belongs to me, and not just the new development. 20 existing homes and your HOA clubhouse are also on my land." The room exploded. People stood up shouting. Someone knocked over a chair. "This is ridiculous," Karen yelled, snatching one of the surveys. "We have permits. We've sold lots. Construction has already started." I stayed calm as she grew redder with anger. "Your permits are based on fraudulent property lines. I've already filed with the court to halt all building immediately." A balding man with thick glasses, the HOA treasurer, examined the documents, his panic growing. "Karen," he whispered, but loud enough for the microphone to catch. "These boundary markers match the old creek bed. They look real." Karen snatched the papers from his hands. "This is a scam to get money from us. We'll fight this in court." I pulled out one last document. "Go ahead," I said, "but here's something you should know." I turned the page for dramatic effect. "According to these legal boundaries, your personal house, Karen, sits entirely on my land." A dead silence filled the room. People looked at each other, the realization sinking in. 20 families might not even own the land their homes were built on. A man in the back stood up. "Are you saying we might lose our houses?" Before I could answer, Karen slammed her hand on the podium. "This meeting is over. Everyone out." She stormed off as people whispered nervously. A younger woman, Rachel Winters, touched my arm. "I just put my life savings into a lot in the new section," she said, her voice shaking. "What happens to me?" I took a deep breath. "I'm not trying to hurt regular people. This is about fixing a wrong." From behind us, Karen's voice hissed like venom. "Don't listen to a word he says." She leaned in, her breath hot with fury. "You have no idea who you're messing with." I stared her down. "I built Willow Ridge from nothing," she continued, "and nobody takes it from me." She stormed out, leaving me alone in the empty room. Through the windows, I saw clusters of worried homeowners talking in the parking lot. My phone buzzed. Mark Callahan. "How did it go?" I typed back. "They know now. Get ready for their next move." What I didn't tell him was how shaken I felt. I had lit the fuse, but I wasn't sure if I was ready for the explosion that would follow. These weren't just houses on a map. They were people's homes. And Karen Whitmore wasn't going down without a fight. The security vehicle outside my farmhouse never left. Karen Whitmore had made her move, and I knew she wasn't going to stop until she crushed me completely. By the afternoon, a county inspector arrived, clipboard in hand. He barely glanced at me before walking through my house like he already knew what he was looking for. 15 minutes later, he handed me a list of violations: faulty wiring, unsafe porch railings, septic issues, all urgent repairs that would cost thousands of dollars to fix. These need to be addressed immediately, he said dryly. I barely had time to process that before another truck arrived, this one carrying freshly printed signs. Future home of Willow Ridge East. Luxury living, coming soon. They pounded them into the ground along my property line like they already owned the place. Then my water pressure dropped to a trickle. I called the utility company, and the response was predictable. Routine maintenance, no estimated time for completion. By dinner, even pizza delivery was a problem. The driver called to say he couldn't find my address, even though I'd ordered from the same place for years. I sat on my porch in the dark, watching the security lights sweep across the fields. Their bulldozers sat silent, waiting for the legal battle to be over so they could finish destroying my grandfather's legacy. Then my phone lit up. Mark Callahan. They just filed a countersuit against you, he said, claiming your documents are forged. Court date set for 3 months from now. 3 months. By then, half the houses would be built. By then, it might be too late. I scrolled through my contacts, looking for anyone who could help. A name jumped out at me. Janet Rivera, a reporter I hadn't spoken to in years. As I considered calling her, headlights appeared in the driveway. A car slowly maneuvered past the concrete barriers. I tensed, expecting trouble. Instead, a familiar figure stepped out. Gerald Fisher, the HOA treasurer. He glanced at the security vehicles before whispering, "I shouldn't be here." "Then why are you?" He pulled a flash drive from his pocket. "Because what she's doing isn't right. You need to see this." Inside at my kitchen table, Gerald opened his laptop and pulled up financial records, meeting minutes and emails. "She's been using HOA funds like her personal bank account," he said. "Special fees that disappeared, contracts awarded to family members, reserve funds funneled into businesses she secretly owned." I scanned the spreadsheets. "This is theft," I muttered. Gerald nodded. "And there's more. The 20 homes on your land, the people living there have been complaining about flooding and drainage issues for years. Karen keeps promising fixes, but nothing ever happens." I leaned forward, because she knew those houses might not even belong to the HOA. Gerald exhaled deeply. "A lot of us are sick of her, Jordan. When you showed up with those property documents, that was the first time I ever saw her scared." My phone buzzed again, this time with texts from numbers I didn't recognize. "We support you against Karen. The Millers, 42, Willow Ridge Lane. She fined us $500 for planting vegetables instead of flowers. Can we help? Jackson family. They took our kids' playground equipment. We want to fight. The Rodriguez family." Gerald smiled slightly. "I may have shared your number with a few people." For the first time since this battle began, I felt hope. Karen had power, connections, and money, but she had also made enemies, and I was about to unite them all against her. The next morning, my water was completely shut off. By noon, my electricity followed. I opened my fridge, staring at the spoiled food inside. Karen thought she could bully me off my own land by making life unbearable. She had another thing coming. I grabbed my notebook and headed straight to Mrs. Henderson's house. When she opened the door in her flowered housecoat, I held up my empty water bottle. "They shut off your utilities?" she gasped. "That's illegal." "So is building on my land," I said. "But Karen owns the county office." Her eyes narrowed. "You want to know who hates the HOA as much as we do?" I pulled up a chair. "I'm listening." By sunset, I had 27 names, people who had been fined into the ground, families who had been forced to sell, elderly couples threatened with liens over mailbox colors, and grandkids visiting too often. I spent the entire day knocking on doors. At first, people were scared to talk. But when I showed them the land surveys, when I told them what Karen had really done, something changed. Hope replaced fear. Karen made my husband dig up our tomato plants because vegetables weren't aesthetic, Sarah Jenkins told me, hands shaking with anger. She fined us $500. My husband works 2 jobs. The Patel family spent $3,000 fighting the HOA over a porch swing. The Johnsons weren't allowed to paint their front door the color they wanted. Every house looked exactly the same, beige with white trim. It's not just the rules, Trevor Martinez told me. It's how she enforces them. Some people get warnings. Others get instant fines. There's no fairness. By nightfall, I called Mark Callahan. Can we legally form a competing HOA? On your land? Absolutely. What about the existing homes? That's where it gets interesting. I took a deep breath. I need the community center for a meeting tomorrow night. Mark laughed. They'll never let you use it. They don't own it, I said. I do. Tears streamed down faces. Voices trembled with frustration and anger, but also hope. The people gathered here tonight at the Willow Ridge HOA Community Center had suffered years of abuse under Karen Whitmore's rule. Fines, threats, manipulation. She had wielded the HOA like a weapon, forcing people to live in fear. But now, for the first time, they saw a way out. I took a deep breath and addressed the crowd. Here's what I propose, I said, voice steady, unwavering. We formed the Pine Haven Homeowners Coalition, a new organization separate from Willow Ridge HOA. Together, we negotiate new property lines that are fair for everyone. We create a new community agreement, one with reasonable rules, transparent finances, and a leadership team chosen by the people, not self-appointed tyrants. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. People turned to one another, nodding, whispering. Then Karen's voice sliced through the room like a knife. You can't do that, she shrieked, leaping to her feet. These homes are bound by contract to Willow Ridge HOA. You are all legally obligated to abide by our rules. I held up the original land survey, my grip firm. Contracts based on fraudulent property ownership aren't valid, Ms. Whitmore. She froze, her face twitching, as she realized the trap she had walked into. But I'm not here to take anyone's home, I continued, my voice calm but commanding. I'm here to fix what's broken. A silence fell over the room, heavy with realization. Then, one by one, people began to clap. The applause swelled, turning into a thunderous roar of approval. The vote was nearly unanimous. 89 families joined the coalition on the spot. As people filed out, energized and hopeful, I felt the weight of the moment. That was when Gerald Fisher, the HOA treasurer, approached me privately. He glanced nervously at Karen, who sat stiffly in the back, furiously typing on her phone. There's something you should know, he whispered. What is it? The HOA's finances don't add up. Monthly dues keep increasing, but our reserves are shrinking. I narrowed my eyes. You're saying someone's stealing money? I've tried to look into it, he admitted, but Karen controls all the accounts. I patted his shoulder. Would you be willing to show me the books? He hesitated, then nodded. Tomorrow morning, my office. At that moment, Karen stormed toward me, her face twisted with pure rage. You've made a terrible mistake, she hissed, jabbing a manicured finger in my face. By this time tomorrow, you'll regret ever stepping foot in Pine Haven. I stared her down. Is that a threat, Miss Whitmore? She smiled coldly. It's a promise. I have the county commissioner, the police chief, and the local judge on speed dial. This little rebellion of yours, it ends now. What she didn't know was that I had invited Janet Rivera, a reporter from the Pine Haven Gazette, to sit quietly in the back of the room. Every word had been recorded. Every threat was documented. As Karen slammed the door behind her, my phone buzzed. Mark Callahan. Environmental survey results came in, he texted. You won't believe what's on that land. I smiled. Karen thought she had all the power, but Grandpa always said, the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. The next morning, I woke up to police cars surrounding my farmhouse. Through the window, I spotted Karen Whitmore standing beside a tall man in uniform. Time to face the music. I opened the door, keeping my expression neutral. The police chief, a thick-set man with a grim expression, stepped forward. You're trespassing on private property, Mr. Walker. I smirked. Actually, Chief Williams, I believe you'll find that I'm the legal property owner. I handed him a folder containing the original land surveys in my grandfather's deed. Karen crossed her arms, scowling. These documents haven't been verified, she snapped. That was when a woman stepped forward from a car I hadn't noticed. Carolyn Mitchell, from the county records office. They have been, actually, she said, laying out copies of official county records. We pulled the original surveys last night after receiving some concerning reports. Karen's face went pale. What? Reports? I gestured toward the farmhouse. Perhaps we should discuss this inside. Coffee's ready. Much 15 minutes later, my kitchen table held an unexpected gathering. The police chief Carolyn from the county records office, Mark Callahan, my attorney, and Karen, whose perfect makeup couldn't hide her growing panic. Carolyn spread the maps across the table. The original property lines were improperly recorded in 1997. This entire area, including the existing Willow Ridge homes and the new construction, legally belongs to the Walker estate. The police chief whistled. That's quite a mistake. Mark leaned forward. Not a mistake. He placed a folder on the table. We have evidence suggesting the boundary change was deliberate. Karen slammed her hand down. This is a scam, a desperate attempt to extort money from hardworking homeowners. I slid another folder toward the police chief. Speaking of money, Gerald Fisher provided these financial records. Care to explain why $427,000 in homeowner dues were transferred to Sunshine Consulting LLC? Karen stiffened. That's our legitimate management company. Owned by your son-in-law, I added, along with 4 other companies that the HOA pays for services, landscaping, security, legal counsel, all funneling money directly to your family. The police chief closed the folder. Ms. Whitmore, we're going to need you to come down to the station. Karen's eyes went wild. This is absurd. Do you know who I am? My husband plays golf with the judge. As the chief led her away, Carolyn turned to me. What happens now? I smiled. We fix what's broken. I sit on my grandfather's porch, watching kids ride bikes past houses with brightly painted doors. The community garden is thriving. The wetlands are protected. And Willow Ridge HOA, it no longer exists. Karen tried to steal my land. Instead, she gave me something far more valuable, a community worth fighting for. Looking back at everything that unfolded in Pine Haven, it's clear that this was never just about property lines or an HOA gone rogue. This was about power, corruption, and the courage to fight back, even when the odds seem impossible. It's about legacy, about standing up for what's right, and about refusing to let greed win. Through this fight, I learned several powerful lessons. Lessons that extend far beyond my grandfather's stolen land and resonate with anyone who has ever been up against a system designed to bully and exploit them. The first and most obvious lesson is that the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. Karen Whitmore, like so many others in positions of unchecked authority, operated under the assumption that she could manipulate reality. She relied on a system where money, influence, and connections dictated the rules, and where the average person was too intimidated, too exhausted, or too disillusioned to fight back. But what she underestimated was the power of undeniable truth. She could throw around fake contracts, bogus fines, and legal loopholes, but truth doesn't bend to intimidation. The moment I found my grandfather's original surveys, the game changed. The entire foundation of her corrupt empire was built on a lie, and once that lie was exposed, it began to crumble. But the truth alone isn't always enough. It must be fought for, defended, and amplified. When I first discovered the fraudulent property changes, I assumed presenting the facts would be enough to correct the injustice. But Karen wasn't afraid of facts. She was counting on burying them. She had control over local officials. She had money. And she had the ability to drag out legal battles until the damage was done. That's why it wasn't enough to simply know the truth. I had to mobilize it. I had to gather allies, go public, and ensure the truth was seen by the right people at the right time. The battle against corruption isn't won by passively waiting for justice. It's won by actively exposing, challenging, and dismantling the system that protects it. That leads to the next lesson. You can't win alone, but together people are unstoppable. Karen held power because she divided and conquered. She used her HOA to harass individuals into submission, enforcing ridiculous rules with crippling fines and making people feel isolated and powerless. But once those individuals came together, everything changed. When I first knocked on doors, people were afraid to speak out. But the moment they realized they weren't alone, fear turned into action. The Pine Haven Homeowners Coalition wasn't just about my land. It became about restoring fairness, transparency, and community control. People who once felt trapped in an unjust system finally had a way out, and that's what gave us real power. The greatest threat to people like Karen isn't a single lawsuit. It's an entire community standing up together and refusing to be silenced. But courage doesn't mean not being afraid. It means acting despite the fear. There were moments in this fight when I wondered if I was in over my head. When Karen cut off my water and electricity, when she sent security to block my driveway, when the police arrived at my house with bogus trespassing charges, it would have been easy to back down. The system was designed to grind me down until I quit. That's how corruption survives, not because it's right, but because it's relentless. And that's why persistence is everything. Karen wanted me to give up. She assumed that if she made my life hard enough, I'd eventually walk away. But what she failed to understand was that this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about honoring my grandfather's legacy, about defending the families she had bullied for years, and about sending a message that power doesn't belong to the corrupt. It belongs to those willing to stand up for what's right. One of the most important lessons I took from this fight is that greed is short-sighted, but integrity lasts forever. Karen could have built something good. She had a thriving community under her leadership, resources, and influence. But she chose greed. She didn't care about the people, only about how much she could take from them. She manipulated property values, pocketed HOA dues, and used her position for personal gain. And in the end, it destroyed her. Her name is now synonymous with corruption. Her real estate empire collapsed, and she lost everything she stole. But my grandfather, his legacy still stands. His name is remembered with respect, his land is protected, and his vision of a thriving, fair community is now a reality. Karen's name will be a cautionary tale, but my grandfather's will be a legacy of integrity and justice. And finally, perhaps the most meaningful lesson, sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment. It's doing what they thought was impossible. Karen wanted to take and destroy. She wanted to turn my grandfather's farm into another soulless development, erasing decades of history for the sake of profit. But instead, she inadvertently helped build something even better. Today, that land isn't just saved, it's thriving. The wetlands are protected, the community is stronger than ever, and people are finally free to live in their homes without fear. The best way to beat someone like Karen isn't just to defeat them, it's to succeed in ways they never imagined possible. As I sit on my grandfather's porch, watching kids ride bikes down safe streets, seeing neighbors work together to maintain their own community, I know the real victory isn't just in what we stopped, but in what we built. Karen tried to steal my land. Instead, she gave me something far more valuable, a community worth fighting for.